Kings have started wars over insults. Presidents have sparked scandals over friendly gestures. And sometimes the thing that almost destroyed an alliance wasn't an army. It was a gift, a lion, a spy device, a cannon that exploded mid-ceremony. This is 44 dumbest diplomatic gifts that caused chaos. Real moments when global leaders wrapped disaster in gold paper and called it diplomacy. 1. In 1414, the French Dauphin made the single greatest trash talk error in military history. When King Henry V of England politely laid claim to some French lands, the Dauphin did not send a counteroffer. He sent a decorative chest filled with tennis balls. The message was brutally clear. You are a little child, so go play games and leave the politics to the men. Henry was reportedly so calm it was terrifying, promising to turn those balls into cannon stones that would smash the French roofs. This sarcastic gift resulted in the Battle of Agincourt, where Henry's archers absolutely decimated the French army in the mud. The Dauphin literally trolled his way into losing the crown. 2. Thomas Jefferson was so deeply offended by a French scientist claiming American animals were tiny that his totally rational diplomatic response in 1787 was to mail the guy a rotting dead moose. Jefferson had a general hunt down a massive 7-foot moose in New Hampshire, but by the time it was shipped across the ocean to Paris, the hair was falling out, the antlers had snapped off, and the carcass smelled like a biological disaster. The French scientist was utterly terrified by this horrible, incredibly smelly monster that unexpectedly arrived at his fancy office. Jefferson basically terrorized the Parisian scientific community with a zombie animal just to win a petty argument about zoology. 3. In the early 16th century, the King of France tried to charm the Ottoman Sultan with an extravagant clock covered in gold, jewels, and tiny moving figurines. It was meant to showcase European genius. The problem? The mechanism constantly broke in the humid climate of Constantinople. Court engineers tried fixing it for weeks, while it ticked unevenly and randomly stopped during formal demonstrations. The Sultan reportedly grew irritated watching European superiority stall in real time. The broken clock quietly symbolized unreliable Western promises, and negotiations cooled almost immediately. 4. Picture eating a highly formal royal dinner, and suddenly your beautiful centerpiece starts shooting at you. In the 16th century, the Holy Roman Emperor received a diplomatic gift that was basically an early robot, a spectacular mechanical golden ship. You wound it up, and it would literally roll across the dining table playing music. But the creators decided to make it a little too realistic. The tiny cannons on the side were fully functional and loaded with real gunpowder. The ship would suddenly fire miniature explosions right over the soup bowls, terrifying the guests, filling the dining hall with thick black smoke and constantly setting the expensive table napkins on fire. 5. When the King of Spain sent King James I a live elephant in 1623, London zookeepers immediately panicked. Nobody in 17th century England knew what an elephant was actually supposed to drink. After some serious debate, they came to the most absurd conclusion possible. They legally mandated that the massive animal must be given exactly 1 gallon of strong red wine every single morning. Just imagine a giant, heavily intoxicated elephant stumbling around the royal menagerie, completely blasted on vintage wine before noon. It was a chaotic, incredibly expensive party trick that turned a majestic diplomatic gift into the biggest tavern patron in London. 6. In 1945, a group of adorable Soviet schoolchildren presented the U.S. ambassador with a beautiful hand-carved replica of the Great Seal of the United States. Touched by the innocent gesture of international friendship, the ambassador hung it right over his desk in the Moscow residence. It comfortably stayed there for 7 whole years. It turns out the Soviets had embedded a highly advanced listening device inside it that did not require batteries or wires. For nearly a decade, foreign intelligence was quietly listening to every single top-secret conversation in the ambassador's office, all because the Americans completely forgot to X-ray a nice wooden gift from some kids. 7. In 1826, the Viceroy of Egypt sent King Charles X of France a live giraffe. This sounds entirely innocent until you realize that absolutely nobody in France had ever seen a giraffe before. They had to walk this towering, awkward creature hundreds of miles from Marseille to Paris, and the journey caused complete societal breakdown. Over 100,000 people poured into the streets of Paris just to aggressively stare at it, causing massive traffic jams, minor public riots, and total urban paralysis. Women started styling their hair in giant towering structures to mimic the giraffe. A single zoo animal accidentally turned the entire French capital into a chaotic circus. 8. In 1717, the King of Saxony made a diplomatic trade that sounds like an absolute fever dream. He desperately wanted a beautiful collection of 151 Chinese porcelain vases that belonged to the King of Prussia. Prussia, on the other hand, was aggressively obsessed with collecting extremely tall men for a specialized military regiment. So they made the swap. Saxony got the antique vases, and Prussia received 600 fully equipped dragoon soldiers. You heard that right? 600 living human beings were officially traded for some fancy kitchenware. The soldiers were understandably incredibly confused about being officially valued slightly less than a ceramic bowl. 9. American Commodore. Matthew Perry wanted to aggressively impress the Japanese shogun in 1853 with a fully functioning steam locomotive. The hilarious punchline to this diplomatic flex is that it was a quarter-scale miniature model. It was way too small to actually sit inside, but the highly respected, terrifying samurai warriors absolutely loved it anyway. Instead of just looking at it from a distance, these fierce warriors eagerly straddled the tiny train cars like oversized children riding wooden toy horses. They joyously spun in endless circles at 20 miles per hour, their traditional robes violently flapping in the wind, completely destroying any serious diplomatic tension in the room. 10. In 1457, the Duke of Burgundy thought he was giving the King of Scotland the ultimate military upgrade by sending a massive siege cannon named Mons Meg. It was a completely useless diplomatic nightmare. This iron monster weighed over 13,000 pounds and was so absurdly heavy that it could only be moved about 3 miles a single day. Trying to drag this ridiculous gift across the muddy Scottish Highlands completely destroyed the local roads, collapsed small bridges, and required a small army of exhausted men just to push it. The king basically received a giant metal paperweight that broke his entire kingdom's infrastructure every time he tried to show it off. 11. King Philip II of Spain was highly religious, so a diplomat decided to give him a mechanical clockwork monk in the 1560s. This small automaton could walk across a table, move its lips in silent prayer, and raise a tiny cross. While it was a genuine marvel of technology, it fell straight into the uncanny valley. The robotic movements were so jerky and unnatural that palace servants whispered the doll was literally possessed by a demon. Imagine trying to eat your royal dinner while a small mechanical monk slowly shuffles toward your plate, making loud clicking noises with a dead wooden stare. It likely cleared the dining hall faster than a fire alarm. 12. The Bey of Algiers gifted a majestic live lion to the King of Sweden in 1731, but the real chaos started after the beast passed away from old age. The king gave the royal pelt to a local taxidermist to perfectly preserve the glorious animal. There was just one massive issue. The taxidermist had absolutely never seen a cat bigger than a stray village tabby. The result was a total visual disaster. He stuffed the royal lion to look like a cross-eyed, ridiculous cartoon character with human-like teeth and a flat face. Today, this hilariously bad taxidermy is safely preserved as a legendary historical joke that still makes people laugh. 13. The British Empire tried to woo China in 1793 with the most high-tech present money could buy, a magnificent gilded state coach. It was a true marvel of British engineering, but it had one catastrophic design flaw for the recipient. The driver's seat was elevated high up in the front to successfully steer the horses. In Imperial China, absolutely nobody was allowed to be physically sitting higher than the emperor. The Chinese court was deeply horrified and suggested the emperor would have to drive the carriage himself. The British stubbornly refused to alter the coach, The emperor refused to ride in it, and the entire massive trade mission collapsed over a seating chart. 14. When the Shah of Persia sent a priceless jeweled dagger to a neighboring ruler in the 17th century, the blade was so encrusted with massive gems it was completely unusable as a weapon. It was too heavy to swing and too fragile to sharpen. The insult was subtle but brutal. A weapon that cannot fight is just expensive decoration. The receiving court debated for weeks whether it was a symbol of respect or a public declaration that their military power was purely ornamental. 15. Tsar Nicholas I of Russia gave the King of Prussia a gift that was essentially a weapon of mass inconvenience in 1843. He proudly sent a spectacular malachite and granite basin. The major catch is that it was 22 feet wide and weighed nearly 60 tons. It was the diplomatic equivalent of dropping a giant boulder on someone. The Prussians actually had to build a custom riverboat just to transport it. When it finally arrived in Berlin, they had to heavily reinforce the city streets so it would not sink into the mud, and knock down structural museum columns just to squeeze it through the front door. 16. In the 1850s, the Ottoman Sultan helped supply the United States military with a fleet of premium camels to create an elite desert cavalry in Texas. It sounded like a brilliant tactical upgrade, but it was an absolute logistical nightmare. Nobody warned the American generals that camels have a terrible attitude problem. The grumpy beasts smelled atrocious, loudly groaned all night, and actively spat massive wads of green goo at the high-ranking officers. Even worse, the camels caused every single American cavalry horse they encountered to violently panic and stampede out of sheer terror. The Great Camel Experiment failed miserably because they basically bullied the entire army. 17. In the 18th century, a Central European ruler sent a neighboring king an enormous ceremonial cannon as a show of military brotherhood. The gift arrived polished, engraved, and completely unstable. During its first public firing ceremony, the overloaded barrel cracked and violently split apart in front of foreign envoys. No one important died, but the explosion shattered windows, injured soldiers, and humiliated the host nation. The symbol of strength literally broke under pressure. And rival courts mocked the incident for years. Nothing weakens an alliance like a cannon that cannot survive its own debut. 18. The King of Portugal enthusiastically tried to send a live rhinoceros to the Pope in 1515, but the ship hit a massive storm and the poor animal unfortunately drowned. The king, however, was absolutely determined to deliver his present no matter what. He literally had his divers retrieve the soggy rhino carcass from the bottom of the ocean, stuffed it with cheap straw, and sent the leaky, incredibly smelly taxidermy to the Vatican anyway. The Pope, who was fully expecting a majestic living beast, ended up receiving a giant, crusty, salt-encrusted zombie rhino that absolutely nobody wanted to be in the same room with. 19. A dairy farmer from New York decided to honor President Andrew Jackson in 1837 with a 1,400-pound wheel of cheddar cheese. It was 4 feet across and wrapped in a patriotic belt. But Jackson had a massive problem because you cannot just eat that much cheese before it goes incredibly bad. He left it in the White House entrance hall for 2 whole years to age. The stench eventually became so horrific that fancy guests reportedly gagged before even entering the building. When the public was finally invited to devour it, the greasy, funky smell soaked deeply into the carpets, leaving the executive mansion smelling like old socks for months. 20. The famous artist Albrecht Dürer was desperate to see a stranded whale in 1520, so a local Dutch ruler generously gifted him a massive, rotting walrus head. The ruler genuinely thought he was being incredibly helpful to the world-famous painter. Dürer was instead stuck awkwardly dragging a gigantic, unimaginably smelly, aggressively decaying marine mammal skull all across Europe. It leaked horrifying fluids all over his expensive luggage, attracted epic swarms of giant flies, and made him the absolute least popular passenger on any public carriage. He basically ruined his own high-profile networking tour just because he politely refused to throw away a cursed biological hazard. 21. In 1893, a Spanish royal presented Queen Victoria with a gown woven entirely from spun glass threads. It shimmered like frost under candlelight and looked like something out of a fairy tale. Unfortunately, spun glass behaves like microscopic needles. The first attempt to unfold it sent tiny splinters into the hands of 2 attendants. Wearing it would have required the courage of a knight and the skin of a rhinoceros. The queen politely admired it once, then had it sealed away forever. The only thing it truly dressed was the royal injury report. 22. King James I of England completely abandoned his royal duties in the 17th century because he became absolutely obsessed with rodents. He desperately wanted exotic pets, so the Virginia Company proudly sent him 2 live flying squirrels all the way from America. The king completely lost his mind over them. He ignored his furious political ministers, skipped serious diplomatic meetings, and spent his days trying to get these tiny nocturnal creatures to glide around his incredibly fancy royal apartments. The most powerful man in the country literally turned the royal court into a giant squirrel playground, forcing highly respected nobles to duck out of the way of flying vermin. 23. In 1355, the Sultan of Egypt sent the King of Cyprus a live leopard as a show of royal respect. The Cypriot court had absolutely no idea how to house it. They chained it inside a decorative courtyard where it promptly escaped, climbed onto the palace roof, and refused to come down for 2 days. Diplomats had to continue official meetings while a spotted predator paced overhead. Nothing strengthens political stability like apex carnivores above your ceiling beams. 24. Queen Victoria was famous for being aggressively modest, so the King of Naples made a spectacular diplomatic error in 1856 by gifting her a totally naked marble statue. It was a life-sized, anatomically perfect stone athlete. Victoria was absolutely mortified by the gift. She simply could not handle a highly detailed, naked stone man chilling in her formal royal palace. Instead of just hiding it in a closet, she completely panicked and demanded an emergency plaster fig leaf be aggressively glued right onto the statue's crotch before anyone else could look at it. She essentially forced the greatest sculptors in England to become emergency stone tailors. 25. George Washington desperately wanted to breed super mules for American farmers, so the King of Spain generously sent him a premium royal donkey in 1785. Washington proudly named him Royal Gift, expecting an absolute stud. The ridiculous problem was that Royal Gift was incredibly snobby. This elite European donkey took one look at the American mares and fell into a deep, completely unimpressed depression. He completely refused to do his job, awkwardly ignoring the ladies while Washington's exhausted farmhands desperately tried to set the romantic mood. The United States' first diplomatic breeding program was derailed by a donkey that felt he was simply too good for the local dating scene. 26. In the 16th century, the King of Poland sent a massive shipment of elaborately embroidered ceremonial robes to a neighboring prince. The problem? The robes were tailored in Polish royal colors, which in that region symbolized surrender. The prince opened the crates expecting luxury and instead found what looked suspiciously like a wardrobe for public humiliation. The garments were never worn. They were quietly locked away, and the relationship between the two courts froze faster than a winter campaign. 27. The King of Siam sent a magnificent, incredibly intricate golden crown to Emperor Napoleon III of France in 1861, causing a massive diplomatic panic. It was a truly stunning piece of jewelry, but the French court was deeply confused because the crown was physically so tiny, it looked like it was tailored for a small dog. Dignitaries were whispering and wondering if the Siamese king honestly thought Napoleon had a bizarrely shrunken head. It turns out, in Siamese culture, this specific style of crown was meant to be delicately balanced on the very top of a traditional hairknot, making the emperor awkwardly balance a shiny golden cone. 28. President Richard Nixon decided to return a diplomatic favor to China in 1972 by sending them 2 massive American musk oxen named Milton and Matilda. The gigantic problem is that musk oxen are biologically built for freezing Arctic tundras, not humid Chinese city zoos. The poor animals immediately caught terrible skin diseases. Their incredibly thick hair started violently falling out in giant clumps, and they both developed a chronically runny nose. Instead of looking like majestic symbols of strong American wildlife, the oxen looked like two sickly, balding rugs, aggressively sneezing on the highly confused Chinese zoo visitors. It was a complete biological embarrassment. 29. The Sultan of Oman shipped 2 aggressive tiger cubs to President Martin Van Buren in 1840, sparking an incredibly petty legal battle. Van Buren was absolutely thrilled and desperately wanted to keep them roaming around as his personal terrifying pets. The United States Congress, however, completely lost their minds over this. They furiously argued that the tigers belonged to the government, sparking a months-long legal drama. While politicians aggressively debated constitutional law over who officially owned 2 growing jungle cats. The tigers were busy actively destroying the expensive White House furniture and terrifying the presidential staff before the government finally confiscated them. 30. In 1798, the United States made arguably the most humiliating diplomatic gift in naval history. To temporarily stop Barbary pirates from aggressively attacking their merchant vessels, the U.S. government actually gifted the Dey of Algiers a massive state-of-the-art warship called the Crescent. But that was not the worst part. To safely deliver this expensive peace offering, the humiliated American captain was legally forced to sail into the foreign harbor flying the Algerian pirate flag physically above the American flag. The United States basically built and gifted a premium, heavily armed battleship directly to the exact same pirates who were actively robbing them, causing massive political outrage back home. 31. Pope Pius IX sent a stunning ancient marble block to be beautifully installed in the newly built Washington Monument in 1854, but it triggered a massive conspiracy. A radical American political group called the Know-Nothings saw the friendly diplomatic gesture as a massive foreign threat. In the middle of the dark night, a mob of angry guys literally broke into the heavily guarded construction site, tightly tied up the poor watchman, aggressively stole the heavy stone, and secretly tossed it straight into the Potomac River. The Pope's incredibly expensive historic gift was treated like a mob victim, causing an absolutely absurd national scandal. 32. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian completely missed the mark. In 1514, when he sent King Henry VIII a highly disturbing suit of armor. It was technically a metal masterpiece, but practically an absolute visual disaster. The heavy helmet was custom designed with a twisted, grotesque human face, complete with a hooked metal nose and weird spectacles. It was supposed to be incredibly whimsical, but it looked so totally ridiculous that Henry flat out refused to wear it in public. Instead of making the king look like a fearsome battlefield warrior, the helmet made him look like a steampunk goblin and was eventually tossed to the court jester. 33. When the Marquis de Lafayette sent George Washington the massive iron key to the Bastille in 1790, it was meant to symbolize the death of tyranny. The problem was scale. The key was huge, heavy, and visibly taken from a prison infamous for brutality. Some Americans saw it as a proud revolutionary trophy. Others saw it as a foreign political message hanging in the president's hallway. The gift quietly divided opinions at home, proving that even symbols of freedom can spark awkward side-eyes. 34. Somebody actually thought it was a brilliant idea to send President Theodore Roosevelt a live badger in 1903. Roosevelt thought this was absolutely hilarious and gave the wild animal to his young children to freely keep inside the White House. The badger, affectionately named Josiah, was an absolute menace to high society. He actively roamed the incredibly fancy presidential halls, viciously hissing and aggressively chasing highly respected political senators and foreign diplomats down the long corridors. The President of the United States literally weaponized a bad-tempered, ankle-biting forest creature against his own politicians, turning the executive mansion into an extreme terrified survival game. Historioff, 35. The Viceroy of China visited New York in 1896 and successfully planted a ginkgo tree at Ulysses S. Grant's tomb to show deep international respect. The cultural gesture was incredibly beautiful, but absolutely no one bothered to tell the viceroy about the weird biology of the ginkgo. He accidentally planted a female tree. When female ginkgo trees naturally drop their ripe fruit, they aggressively release a pungent smell that is universally described as resembling rancid butter or pure vomit. For decades, solemn visitors to the highly respected military monument were greeted not by the sweet scent of diplomacy, but by a horrible stench that made their eyes water. Diusa, 36. British diplomat Richard Burton visited the fierce kingdom of Dahomey in 1863 and was casually gifted a squad of extremely lethal female warriors to take back to London. Burton was absolutely terrified by the generous offer. He had absolutely no idea how to safely explain to his strict Victorian wife that he had returned from a routine diplomatic trip with a private army of heavily armed, terrifyingly competent women. He had to awkwardly and desperately decline the royal gift, sweating profusely, knowing these legendary warriors were not exactly the kind of people you want to politely reject without causing a massive international incident. 37. President John Quincy Adams received a massive wooden box of live silkworms from a foreign diplomat in 1826 and decided to enthusiastically raise them inside the White House. The grand idea was to kickstart a highly profitable American silk industry. Adams, being an absolute nerd for experimental science, casually planted mulberry trees in the gardens and let these fuzzy little caterpillars completely take over the presidential residence. He would literally bring intimidating foreign dignitaries into his formal office, only to have them awkwardly stare at thousands of hungry worms aggressively munching on green leaves right next to the most powerful desk in the country. 38. In the 17th century, King Charles II received a pineapple from Barbados and treated it like a royal treasure. Pineapples were so rare in Europe that they were rented out for parties as decoration before being eaten. The king proudly posed with it in a formal portrait, elevating tropical fruit to state propaganda. The absurdity was not lost on foreign diplomats. While European powers fought costly wars over land and trade routes, England's monarch was immortalized celebrating imported produce. The pineapple became a symbol of elite excess and quiet proof that power sometimes flexes in the strangest ways. 39. The Caliph of Baghdad sent Charlemagne an Asian elephant named Abul Abbas in the year 801, creating an absolute logistical nightmare. It was the ultimate medieval diplomatic flex, but Europe was absolutely not zoned for giant wandering pachyderms. Charlemagne loved his new huge pet so much that he actively insisted on taking it on all his important royal road trips. The heavy elephant completely destroyed delicate wooden bridges, ate entire fields of peasant cabbages, and caused ancient traffic jams everywhere it walked because villagers would freeze in sheer shock. The emperor essentially demolished the local agricultural economy everywhere he traveled. 40. An enthusiastic political supporter sent President Calvin Coolidge a live raccoon in 1926, specifically meant to be cooked and eaten for a fancy Thanksgiving dinner. Coolidge took one long look at the furry little trash panda and immediately decided it was his new best friend instead of a meal. He completely pardoned the raccoon, officially named her Rebecca, and started casually walking her around the White House lawns on a highly decorated leash. He even brought her to high-class diplomatic meetings, completely forcing serious foreign ambassadors to maintain a totally straight face while the president casually stroked a wild forest scavenger. 41. The Dutch East India Company tried to aggressively impress the Japanese shogun in 1639 by gifting him a highly advanced, incredibly heavy brass mortar cannon. It was supposed to be a flawless demonstration of European military dominance, but nobody actually bothered to properly train the local Japanese gunners. During the grand, highly anticipated diplomatic demonstration, the nervous soldiers stuffed the barrel with way too much gunpowder. The cannon violently exploded right in front of the highly respected officials, sending heavy metal shrapnel flying and causing a terrifying smoke-filled disaster. Instead of establishing a lucrative international weapons trade, the Dutch accidentally bombed the shogun's royal courtyard. 42. In 1518, the Ottoman Sultan Selim the Grim received an incredibly luxurious gift from the rival Safavid Shah, a massive, ornately jeweled golden throne. There was just one incredibly petty, passive-aggressive problem. The Shah knew perfectly well that Selim was slightly shorter than average, so he deliberately built the seat of the throne extremely high with absolutely no footstool attached. The terrifying Sultan literally had to jump and awkwardly scramble just to climb into his own diplomatic present, leaving his royal legs dangling like a small toddler. It was an absolute masterpiece of historical trolling that left the feared ruler looking completely ridiculous. 43. In 1620, a powerful West African ruler sent a breathtaking solid gold throne to a European monarch as a display of wealth and dominance. The Europeans completely misunderstood the message. Instead of recognizing it as a symbol of sovereignty, they melted portions of it down to mint commemorative coins. Word eventually made it back across the ocean. What was meant to signal equality was treated like spare change. Diplomatic respect evaporated instantly. 44. In 1896, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia visited France and was gifted a magnificently carved, extremely heavy ceremonial military sword. The French president handed it over with incredible pride during a highly publicized, dead-silent formal event. The Tsar enthusiastically grabbed the weapon to inspect the craftsmanship, but the heavy metal blade was so incredibly loose in the scabbard that it immediately slid out and violently crashed onto the marble floor. The sharp steel aggressively bounced, narrowly missing the Tsar's foot, and created a deafening, incredibly awkward clang that echoed through the entire room. The grand symbol of an unbreakable military alliance literally fell apart. 44 gifts. 44 moments where power, ego, and terrible judgment collided. But here's what bothers me. History is full of awkward presents and political trolling. So tell me, which insane diplomatic gift did we miss? Not a safe one. The most embarrassing one. Drop it below and explain why it deserves the crown. Like the video if this shocked you, and subscribe, unless you think you could have picked better gifts than kings and presidents.